Yehi shalom bechelech shah be'armenotai. Psalm 122. Shir Hamalot LeDavid. How delighted I was when they said to me, let us go up to the house of Adonai. Our feet stand at your gates, O Jerusalem. Jerusalem rebuilt, a city knit together, where the tribes once made their pilgrimage. Sha'alu shalom Yerushalayim. Seek the peace of Jerusalem. May those who love you be tranquil. Yehi shalom bechelech, shalva ba'armenotayech. May there be peace within your ramparts, tranquility in your palaces. For the sake of my family and friends, I pray for the peace I seek for you. For the sake of the house of Adonai our God, I seek your welfare. Many of us, I know, are familiar with this absolutely gorgeous psalm. The early rabbis crafted from it a remarkable concept. Jerusalem built up, Yerushalayim habnuyah, a city knit together, ki'ir shekubra la yachtav. What does that mean? It means, they said, there are two Jerusalems. Yerushalayim shel mata, below, in the real world, the one we know. And Yerushalayim shel mala, above, in the heavenly realms. Directly opposite each other, mirroring one another, two Jerusalems, inextricably bound together, dependent upon each other, a city knit together, yachdav. In other words, about 1,500 years before Parker Palmer spoke of standing in the tragic gap between aspiration and reality, the rabbis had the same idea. Shalmala, shalmata, above and below. Palmer was writing about American democracy and the habits of the heart necessary to sustain it. The rabbis were speaking of a Jewish homeland and the habits of the heart necessary for us and God to dwell there together. Now, as we know, too painfully, the two grand experiments that I spoke of, Israel and the American Jewish community, are very much shalmata. They are this worldly, wonderful, beautiful, very complicated. Shalmala, above, they don't have to deal with national security and longshoremen strikes and disinformation campaigns, right? Below we do. So there's a tragic gap. Right now, mamash, tragic. In Israel, whether we focus on our own trauma, our losses and grief, hostages, ongoing rockets and threats, or we focus on the trauma in Gaza and the West Bank, or we're holding both, this isn't how we want Israel and Jews to be. We don't want to be huddled in shelters. And we don't want our children killing other people's children. No one wants that. Similarly, we don't want an America filled with gun violence and hate and lies, anti-Semitism, xenophobia, distrust of core institutions, neighbor against neighbor, unable to talk to each other. This isn't how things could and should be, and it is heartbreaking. And let's name a third tragic gap that we are living in. what the Jewish community aspires to be, and our experience of that community this year. For sure, many of us have felt held and supported, connected. We've felt solidarity, and that is very real. And it's only part of the picture. It's also true that many Jews across the religious and political spectrum, right, on all sides, have felt alienated, betrayed by Jewish groups we once felt part of, disappointed by rabbis and leaders we once admired, hurt by beloved friends, our own family. The alienation hurts enough when it comes from non-Jewish people and groups. Bad enough. Within, many feel our, quote, solidarity has come only through silencing dissenting voices, with different types of voices being silenced in different Jewish spaces. And that real, honest, nuanced, hard discussion is rarely happening. So yes, the tragic gaps we experience today in Jewish life and everywhere seem especially wide, and they probably are. But we shouldn't engage in false nostalgia either, and think that there was ever a time when those gaps didn't exist. There have always been two Jerusalems and two Americas, the one that could be and the one that is. Both countries were founded on grand visions which have never yet been fully embodied. Why? Because living in the real world is complicated. And because of external foes and internal contradictions and the vagaries of we human beings and our virtues. Nor ought we indulge despair about this messed up, broken, earthly world as it is, as though it's not valuable or good because it's not everything we want it to be. Like the Leah Goldberg poem from yesterday that you have on the sheet. God is the unity above and the distorted, fractured image below. The rabbis who imagined two Jerusalems understood the tragic gap as built into the fabric of creation. There's a debate in the Talmud about the very first verse in the Torah, right? The very first verse. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et ha'aretz. In the beginning of God's creating of the heavens and the earth. There's a debate. Beit Shammai, who is known for their exacting standards, says that means the heavens came first. Beit Hillel, who is known for compassion and understanding real human beings, says the earth came first. Now, on the surface, they're debating the order of creation, but it's really about importance and purpose. Here's an 18th century commentator, the Or HaChaim from Morocco. The verse means to say, God created not only the heavens, but even also the earth. The way one expresses something precious. For the earth is more beloved to God and more elevated because the heavens depend on it. The rabbis say, to resolve the debate, they were created as one. Ka'achat nivra'u. And everyone agrees, even Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai, ya'amdu yachdav. They stand together. They don't separate from one another. So yes, the world is topsy-turvy, upside down. It's all wrong. It's all wrong. And yet, This is exactly the beloved world we're meant to struggle with and uplift. And the key is to figure out how to stand in the tragic gap despite our desire to escape it, as we talked about yesterday, right? To not become a cynic and simply settle for what is, nor an idealist and ignore the hard realities we face, nor pretend there's no gap at all and everything's fine. Or to quote again Aaron Dorfman, who taught us in the Democracy series, and who enjoined us as an act of patriotism to love America. And he said we have a problem doing it, and it's different on both sides. On one side, usually on the left, he said, it's broken, so I can't love it. On the other side, usually the right, he said, I love it, so it can't be broken. It applies not just to America, to Israel, to basically anything. It takes great courage and strength and resilience to value and love the real world and the real countries of Israel and America in their beauty and nobility and brokenness and failures, and strive to make them better. Now, why is this so essential? I've already talked about the question of agency. We talked about that yesterday, right? If we're cynics, no point in trying to make anything better. If we're idealists, there's no ability to make anything better because we're not confronting practical limits and challenges to be effectual. But it's important for other reasons as well. First, standing in the tragic gap is part of our purpose as Jews and human beings. We are not meant to dwell in Gan Eden, in a perfect world, a pre-moral realm. Nor are we meant to live in the heavens. God has enough angels. We're not in Yerushalayim Shalmala. Our life is here, Shalmata, in the earthly Jerusalem or New York or wherever we live. The earth is more precious. Even the heavens depend upon it. At the same time, neither are we meant to forget Gan Eden. Forget Jerusalem above. Forget Malchut Shamayim, the kingdom of God, which the rabbis envision as a world of love and justice. Our mission, what gives vitality and meaning to life and our Jewishness, is precisely that striving. If we separate the two Jerusalems, we may value only the religious, spiritual meaning. We may ignore or disdain the very real challenges of governing a nation and keeping it safe. That is not life-giving. Suicide is not a moral value. Jews are entitled to be physically safe in our homeland. Or we may focus only on realpolitik, our own physical safety and security, forgetting the values and principles essential to our spiritual well-being that give life meaning, everything the Torah says about why we have a homeland. Jews are called to be a light to the nations, to embody justice and love. Speaking very personally, I feel similarly about American democracy. Our pursuit of equality, justice, dignity for all, the rule of law, are an integral part of my Jewish identity and how I fulfill my calling and mission as a human and as a Jew. Because we're supposed to care not only about Jews, but about the world. All the liturgy of Rosh Hashanah. Take a look closely. It's universalist. It's about the world. That's the first. The second thing, the second reason that standing in the tragic gap is so essential is because only there is nuanced moral reasoning possible. The purity of idealism Not only does it create cancel culture, which I talked about yesterday, it has no space for the concept of the moral remainder. What is the moral remainder? In the real world of action, sometimes there isn't a morally pure choice, an option that doesn't cause harm. The harm that is caused when we do the right thing is called the moral remainder. To be a moral person demands hard choices and moral compromise, not because we're hypocrites, but because we're human. And we can't always fulfill every obligation we have. The cynic, on the other hand, may acknowledge the moral remainder, but doesn't care, feels no responsibility for it. It is what it is. And I want to say one of the most dangerous and destructive trends in our world today, and it's everywhere, it's on the right and the left, it's here and in Israel, emerges because we have lost moral nuance. And what I'm talking about now is the equation of victimhood status and moral rectitude. I'm oppressed or threatened, so whatever I do is right. You're the oppressor or the threat, so everything you do is wrong. No further moral inquiry required, full stop. The result? All bets are off, all violence is justified. On the left, it's the absurd, simplistic ideology used to justify Hamas's horror. On the right, it's the ideology that refuses to ask any questions about Israel's response. On the left, only victimized groups are entitled to respect and care. Anyone branded as, quote, privileged should shut up and step aside. On the right, feeling threatened justifies threats against election officials, inciting hatred of immigrants, Nazis in Charlottesville, violence of January 6th. Positioning oneself as victim has shockingly wide appeal right now. And I believe precisely because it enables us to excuse immorality, our own and our heroes, and feel right. And so instead of a society striving upward toward love and compassion and justice, we are in a competition to prove ourselves the greater victim and more aggrieved. And we have to be honest, Jews are sometimes part of that. Being oppressed or victimized doesn't absolve anyone of moral responsibility. That actually is the central message of the entire Exodus narrative. That is the core narrative of the Jewish people. You were oppressed, and therefore you may not oppress others. Therefore you know, and so you are more responsible, not less. Only by standing in the tragic gap can we practice that. And here's the third and last reason that standing in the tragic gap is so essential. And that's because if we don't, we end up divided. Here's Parker Palmer. He writes, "What shall we do with our heartbreak so that it yields life and not death? If we were all heartbroken about the same thing, the question would be easy. Reach consensus on something better, join hands toward that end. But the sources of our heartbreak are different and often contradictory. What makes my heart sad may make your heart glad. As Jews as Americans, we don't all think and feel the same way about what is most frightening, most heartbreaking, how we got here, and the best way forward. That difference and diversity is more than okay. It's actually good, provided we learn from each other and don't turn on each other. But when we're unable to stand in the tragic gap, which is inherently a place of ambiguity and uncertainty, we don't learn. We point fingers. I am not naive, but I truly believe that if somehow most of us, or at least more of us, could manage to stand in the tragic gap more of the time, most of us would come together. We wouldn't agree on everything, maybe on anything, but we would be able to sit together in heartbreak. And instead of recrimination and demonization, we could talk to each other. One of the things that so many of us are grieving in this time is the loss of nuance. The ability to simply sit with complexity and our own mixed feelings and our uncertainty without being pressured to stand under a banner and fight for our side. We grieve the space to talk deeply with good people who are also heartbroken but see things differently. That's how we learn. And we grieve our humanity, which gets lost in the process. You want to know who I've had absolutely zero interest in reading or listening to since October 7th? All the people who say, you see, I was right. You want to know who's been really worthwhile reading and listening to and talking to? Few and far between though they be, the people who are feeling all the prior paradigms and patterns have been shattered. I feel a little lost. I'm confused. But I know we need to find new ways of thinking and new paths forward. That's where all the generativity is coming from. Now again, I am not naive, nor is Palmer. Palmer, in his updated introduction to the new edition of the book, rightly sees standing in the tragic gap and creative tension holding generally, this is his thesis, as a path to addressing the vast divides we face as a country. But he's clear, as he says, I am not chasing the fantasy that someday we will all get along. Given human nature and the nature of politics, there will always be people with whom dialogue is impossible. And on some days, I am one of them. Such a Jewish end, right? For an author, actually, it's me, right? Here are his examples of the things that are over the line. One, there can be no give and take between violent and nonviolent approaches to problem solving. He says, where's the middle ground between let's talk and I'll let my AR-15 talk for me, right? We could substitute, I'll let Hamas or Hezbollah talk for me, right? You can't have a conversation. The same is true, he says, when demonstrable facts are, quote, countered with claims that there are no facts, or with fictions generated by conspiracy theorists who refuse to reveal alleged evidence, right? If we're not in the same realm of talking about facts, what do we talk about? Or when one side embraces the inherently evil premise that there is such a thing as a, quote, superior race, ethnicity, nationality, or religion, and I would gloss that as saying treating any group as less than fully human, right? You can't compromise on that. Not all difference can be transcended, and there isn't always a creative, positive way forward. But too often we dismiss other people as crazy or ignorant or evil because we've never actually interrogated the nuance of even our own, much less the other person's moral values. Someone says, I love you. It's great, it's beautiful. What does love mean to you? How do you express it? How do you experience it? How do you receive it? The same with justice, compassion, patriotism. We may all, or most of us, agree that Ahavat Yisrael, loving the Jewish people, loving Israel, is a Jewish value, a Torah value. I have to tell you, never in our history have we had unanimity on exactly what Ahavat Yisrael means or who it applies to. Never in our history. And again, I'm not naive. This is really, really hard. For the reasons we've talked about, because holding any kind of tension is hard, and this one breaks our hearts, and also because the tragic gap between what is and could be requires us to sit with some other really difficult feelings. Cognitive dissonance, moral injury, helplessness. And right now, we are being asked to hold all of those feelings while simultaneously being under attack. When we're scared and we're vulnerable and we are feeling wrongly accused. If we don't allow our hearts to break and we don't allow those feelings in, we may find ourselves numb, wondering where our compassion went, and frankly, not functioning so well. Or our hearts will break apart instead of open, and we'll stay frightened and angry, attacking other people who are also heartbroken, just differently than we are, and we'll all become small. Learning to stand in the tragic gap, helping our hearts break open, is the work of a lifetime. It is long-term practice. We'll talk about it, as I said, more on Yom Kippur. And later, at the end of the service, I'm going to give you 4 concrete tasks, our homework, between now and Yom Kippur. But for now, I'm going to close with this, which might be a bit of a surprise. As I've been talking about the heavenly and the earthly Jerusalem, I'm guessing you assumed, in part because I've pretty much framed it this way, that the one above is the pattern for the one below, right? And we have rabbinic stories like that. Moses is commanded to make the menorah, and he doesn't know how to do it, and God points a finger at the heavenly pattern and says, make it like this, right? It should look like that. We have that. And there are some texts about Yerushalayim Shalmala that suggest that. It's a divine blueprint. But somehow, in the transfer to the world, it broke, it got distorted, right? But that's the pattern. It turns out most of the early rabbinic texts have it going in the opposite direction. God saw how beautiful our Jerusalem was below. And God decided to build a corresponding Jerusalem above. It turns the whole thing on its head. It's not about some heavenly vision we can only imagine. The aspirational vision and version, the sense of what could be, is created by us. We have the capacity to get it right, to create moments of breathtaking spiritual beauty and moral grandeur, even if only for one brief shining moment that was here in Camelot, right? The faithfulness we talked about yesterday isn't only faithfulness to moments when we experience God breaking into our lives, it's faithfulness to those moments when we ourselves rise to the occasion, when the nobility of the human being shines forth. And these midrashim say God then looks and says, yes, I want more of that. I'm going to do that. In other words, the rabbis didn't imagine two Jerusalems so that the heavenly one might accuse the earthly one. It's not about harsh judgment, a constant state of inadequacy and criticism. The rabbis imagined two Jerusalems so that they might be in dialogue with each other, so that they would challenge and inform each other, so that we would challenge and teach each other. With our aspirations shaped by our experience of life and our experience of life shaped by our aspirations, they imagined two Jerusalems to push us to stand always in the tragic gap between them. Yerushalayim habenuya, ke'ir shechubra la yachdav, Jerusalem built up, a city knit together. We will turn to page 123 and the service of Musaf. I will ask us to rise in body and or spirit. I just want to remind everyone, we stand for a long time. At any point you need to sit down, please do so. Page 123. We rise, please, in body and or spirit for Chatzi Kaddish.